I call it the five pillar method of changing your gut health. So the five pillars that I use is purpose. Number two is, we all think about this, is food and nutrition. Number three is movement, but specifically movement with purpose. Four is community, or some people call it tribe. And last is spirituality. Purpose-driven living, that's to me the hardest one to have. And lots of my patients, especially young patients, are walking around aimlessly. People don't have a drive or don't always know what their purpose is. Now, what does that have to do with gut health, right? What does it have to do with health in general?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. Welcome to the Myers Detox Podcast. Today we have Dr. Partha Nandi, and he's going to be talking about how you can heal your gut to save your brain. He has a new book out, and we're going to be expanding on the very delicate and very real connection between the gut and the brain, that gut-brain axis, and things you can do to dramatically improve your gut health that will improve your brain health. If you have leaky gut, you probably have leaky brain. We talk about his 5 pillars of health that will help reduce inflammation in your body, including diet and exercise, but a lot of surprising pillars as well. And we talk about his new book, Heal Your Gut, Save Your Brain, and really what he's trying to do with his work to help his patients and people live longer, healthier lives and prevent dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, which someone is diagnosed with every few seconds. And it's a devastating illness. So we're going to talk about how to prevent that and what you can do today to prevent that in the future. Our guest today, Dr. Partha Nandi, he's an MD, a patient advocate, health hero, practitioner, and leader. And born in Calcutta, India, Partha survived rheumatic heart disease. And for him, that made an everlasting commitment to patient care. And through this trial grew the intrigue and drive necessary to become what he is today, which is one of the leading patient advocates in the United States. Dr. Nandi is a creator and host of the nationally and internationally syndicated medical lifestyle television show, Ask Dr. Nandi. Ask Dr. Nandi tackles inquiries from all over the world, managing to reach over 95 million homes daily. And Dr. Nandi's appearances also include TEDx, college commencements, numerous charity functions, and premier medical meetings. Dr. Nandi also loves to write when he's able to take a break from being one of the top holistic health practitioners in the nation. He's also the best-selling author of Ask Dr. Nandi, 5 Steps to Becoming Your Own Health Hero, and his new book, Heal Your Gut, Save Your Brain, the 5 pillars of enhancing your gut and optimizing your cognitive health. You can learn more about Dr. Nandi's work at askdrnandi.com. Dr. Nandi, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, Wendy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so you're the host of the wildly popular The Ask Dr. Nandi show, where you have 95 million people on a daily basis tuning in, or potentially in 95 million homes. So tell us a little bit more about your show and yourself in general, your goals, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you so much. The television show is really an extension of what I do with my patients every day. And we basically want to be able to give people, ways to be able to better their lives. We have the saying that we want people to become health heroes, which means that to become advocates for their health and really understand what it takes to be able to live a life that's joyful and vibrant. So I'm a practicing gastroenterologist. I still see patients every day. But I felt like when people have problems, I felt like we needed to reach more than just the one-on-one I do every day. So that's why we started with the television show, which reached one station in Detroit, Michigan, and then we expanded, and now we're syndicated throughout the country and the world. So we feel like it's really a great opportunity. We feel lucky to be able to reach folks all over the world, to be able to give them some of the tools needed to live the best life that they can.
Yeah, I know my mom watches your show. After I appeared on it many, many years ago, my mom started watching it. She loves you.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome.
But you have a new book coming out. It's called Heal Your Gut, Heal Your Brain. And I thought you had some really, really interesting insights in this book that's coming out in October 2024. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the book is called Heal Your Gut, Save Your Brain, and we're releasing it October 1st. And it was really inspired by my dad. My dad was my first hero, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was somebody who I call a Renaissance man. So if you ever drive, on the streets, on the road at night, and you'll see these little bit of reflective tape at the sides of the road that keeps you from going off into the ditch or whatever. My dad developed those road reflectors, so
Oh,
he
wow.
saved billions of lives. He would also make like lots of inventions. One of them would be to have a polymer that, in case a runway gets bombed, let's say he worked with the Air Force and the runway gets bombed, he would create a plasma that or polymer that would make a runway within 15 minutes. And
Wow.
it was harder than that. So he was a very bright man. But he also, when I was young, he was always there for me. And when I had a life-threatening illness when I was 6 years old, he really showed me what you're supposed to do. So my dad was really everything to me. And when after I became a physician and was practicing, he had a devastating stroke. My dad was healthy, didn't ever get hospitalized, never was ill, and all of a sudden he had the stroke, and that stroke really robbed him of the last decade of his life. He couldn't, do the things with his grandkids that he wanted to do. He was somebody who always, my mom and I would joke. He went on a cruise with my mom, and so Wendy, within 30 minutes, but maybe not 30 minutes, maybe a couple hours, he would have the half the cruise reading their palms, and that's who my dad was. He had so much wisdom, and he was such a gregarious person that robbed him of the last 10 years of his life. So I thought to myself, what am I missing? What is it that I'm not seeing that led him to have this? Because most of the docs said we don't know, and he really didn't have. He did all the testing, and there was nothing there. So at the time when he had the stroke, this is 2007, I didn't have many answers. But since that time, I've been researching and looking. I'm a gastroenterologist. And I look at the gut, and we now have a lot of evidence that the gut is really related to the brain, and there's a big connection. And one of my goal in writing this book is so that others don't have the same fate that my dad did, that the families like myself, my sister, and my mom who had to really go through seeing him and really not being able to do any of his normal daily activities. I want others not to go through that. And that's kind of the impetus. That's what inspired me to really write this. And I think that there's a lot of evidence now, and we will talk about it, that really can prevent people from having the same fate as my dad. That's what this book is about. And I think it can really change lives. We tell people that, my patients, that every 3 seconds someone is diagnosed with dementia. Every 6 seconds someone is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Every 4 minutes someone dies of a stroke. These are not just, small numbers or something that happens once in a while. This happens all the time. And we'd love to be able to prevent as many people from suffering from these neurodegenerative diseases as possible.
Yeah. And so I want you to talk about the gut-brain axis because there's such a huge connection there. But on the same token, there's so much working against our gut and a healthy gut microbiome to like the chlorine and just you're showering in every day and your shower water. If you're drinking tap water, you're getting chlorine, in your food, glyphosate, which is kills your gut bacteria, natural and prescribed antibiotics. I mean, it just goes in smoking, sugar, destroys your gut microbiome. Most people are exposed to that every single day. So it's no surprise that people's guts today and their gut microbiome is a complete wreck.
You're 100%. You said all the things that we're going against. It's like a salmon, swimming upstream, except we're not equipped to swim upstream. That's why we have all these problems, not just with the brain, but everything else. But the connection, you asked me about the connection between the gut and the brain. The gut and the brain are intimately connected. Remember that to me, the gut really is the center of your health. And, it doesn't just talk to your brain, it talks to every part of your body, so to speak, and, including your heart, your joints. It could be responsible for autoimmune disease. It can be responsible for people with arthritis. So there's a lot that the gut's responsible for. But the gut and the brain have a special relationship. It's kind of like if you've ever seen two teenagers talking about a Taylor Swift concert. That's how much the gut, the brain talk. They are communicating all the time. And the way they communicate is the first one is a direct one, which is via something called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is longest nerve in the body. And there's a direct communication between the brain and the gut. And it's bidirectional, meaning the gut talks to the brain and vice versa. So what happens is that there are direct signals that are sent to the brain, from the gut saying, hey, everything is good. And the same thing with the brain. If you are, and you talked about this a little bit, when you are stressed or you're getting stimuli in your brain, your gut is told to kind of take a pause. It's not important for you to be able to have the right microbiome, have the right nutrients, have the right milieu. So it's really important that the gut and the brain have to function well together via the vagus nerve. Then you have to remember that the gut wall, right? The gut wall, and I'm sure you've talked about this before in your podcast, that the gut wall is actually one cell layer thick. So on one side is poop, on the other side blood. It's one cell layer thick, right? That's preventing poop from going into your blood. And when you have problems with that gut wall integrity, when you have little cracks in that wall, we call that leaky gut. In functional medicine and holistic medicine, we've talked about leaky gut for a long time, but traditional medicine, which I'm part of as well, they poo-pooed that. They said, leaky gut, there's no such thing. But now there's a new name for it. It's called intestinal permeability. So intestinal permeability means just what I said, little openings in the wall that allows inflammation to occur. And if you have inflammation that happens, we're not talking about big pieces of stool going there. We're talking about little tiny solutes, little tiny pieces that are not supposed to go into your blood. And also, for example, parts of a bacteria that's in your gut, they go into your bloodstream, right? Go outside of where the gut wall is. That begins the cascade of inflammation. So inflammation, which is your body thinks is abnormal, it starts to fight it. Now, if that happens once in a while, that's okay. And if it happens a lot when you have a leaky gut or you have intestinal permeability, then that inflammation continues unabated. So it just continues on. That inflammation can spread to other parts of your body. For the brain, it can go to what's called the blood-brain barrier. The blood and the brain, where the brain actually connects to the blood, has a barrier. The brain does not want anything to go in there unless it absolutely needs it, right? So when you have inflammation that begins to your gut and goes into your body, and it can affect the blood-brain barrier, it can cause little cracks in that barrier. Once you have inflammatory mediators or stuff that can inflame your brain go into the brain, then what happens is the brain begins the process of inflammation. Again, if it happens once in a while, it's okay. If it happens more than just once in a great while, it happens on a chronic basis, it begins the process of inflammation. So that's the second way the gut and the brain can really connect or are related. The third one you talked about, which is the microbiome. So we have this trillion-member army within the gut, right? So bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa, they all have been living in our gut for really thousands and thousands of years. Remember, the microbiome actually were there way before we were there, up to 15 million years ago. And then they got smarter and got better, and then they live within us. And what we give the microbiome is this: we give them nutrients to help them survive, have them thrive, and get the right environment so they can be in the right environment and live. What they give us is amazing stuff that we need through thousands of years of evolution. So they give us products, for example, neurotransmitters. So many folks don't know that, for example, serotonin, which is your feel-good hormone, 95% of it is made within your gut, and it's made by your microbiome. So it's important to have a healthy microbiome. Something called GABA, GABA, also is can be made by the microbiome. So the microbiome creates neurotransmitters, which are basically transmitting into your brain to be able to help the brain function, help you. For example, we call serotonin the feel-good hormone. So if you don't have the right environment, the right amount, the concentration of neurotransmitters, you may not feel yourself. Sometimes, we wake up or we're throughout the day, you don't really know why you don't feel like you're up to it. It may be that your gut health is not what it's supposed to be, and that's why it's not creating the neurotransmitters. In addition, the microbiome can create short-chain fatty acids, which, remember, I talked about the gut wall. It keeps it strong so that stuff doesn't get through and into your bloodstream from your intestine. So the microbiome is super important. The last piece is the inflammatory cells and the immune system of the gut. So the immune system of the gut is so important to be able to function properly. If you don't have a functioning proper immune system in the gut wall, it's got the most sophisticated immune system. If it's not functioning well, then you can allow inflammation. You can allow aberrant inflammation that's not needed to go to parts of your body, including the brain. So it's super important to be able to keep your gut healthy And you talked about, it's wherever you go, it seems like there are factors that didn't exist even 100 years ago that are eroding your microbiome. It's not so much that, everything's so bad that all hope is lost. It's not that. It's just that we've introduced so many changes that are negative in such a short period of time, your body just cannot accommodate. Like, for example, we didn't have fast food restaurants, right? 100 years ago, we didn't. But in the last 50 years, we put so much stuff in our food that our microbiome doesn't even know what to do with it. They've never seen it before. Same with all the toxins you talked about. So there's just an abundance of stuff that really tried to erode your gut health. And what I'm saying to you is that, we're seeing this epidemic of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, for example. And it's in a large part due to the fact that your gut health is poor. And it's important to highlight that.
So for anyone listening that really wants to detox their body, go to heavymetalsquiz.com. I created a quiz for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. Based on some lifestyle questions, you can get your toxicity score and get a free video series that answers all of your frequently asked questions about how to detox your body. Check it out, heavymetalsquiz.com. Yeah, and Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia are largely preventable. And so that's why I love that you are talking about this and have a book about this, about solutions, because there is so much working against our guts and our brains, but there's a lot of different things that you can do to fix that. I think there's a lot of people walking around just feeling, depressed, anxious, or just flat, and because they're not making the neurotransmitters that their gut bugs should be making. So what are some other symptoms that people have? They have leaky gut, or also, they're going to have leaky brain if they have leaky gut. What are some of those other symptoms that people should maybe be on the lookout for?
That's a great question. I had a patient this last week. His name was Henry, and he came to me as an executive, and he said, "Dr. Nandi, I want to crawl up in a ball. I don't want to have any more meetings. I don't want to do anything because I just cannot think straight. I can't think properly." So one of the things that people talk about is brain fog, right? When you feel like, you can't quite concentrate, whether you're in school or work or in your personal life, you feel like this whole, it's almost like a little shield is placed in your brain that doesn't allow you to have good concentrated thought and focus. And that's one of the big symptoms that we talk about, which is brain fog. And if you really go after your gut health, you can change that. It's not a miracle. It doesn't happen within a day, but over days and weeks, you can make those changes. The other things are, for example, forgetfulness, right? Small things that you think, hey, where did I put my keys? And if it happens once in a while, it's one thing, but being forgetful, forgetting to, for example, call, a friend that you always did when they had a birthday, or heaven forbid, even forgetting names of loved ones. I mean, this is what you can have as you go through the process of neurodegeneration. And what happens is that on the outside, people look great. Let me think about it. If you don't succumb to heart attacks or cancer, then what do we worry about? We worry about losing our mind, right? Thinking about the fact that maybe one day, someone you love may not remember who you are. Think about that. Even that's what we worry about. So it can be very subtle symptoms of your memory. It can be very subtle symptoms of really losing your focus during times. My dad, for example, and this is something that, he was very charming. So he got away by explaining it away. He was driving, went for an errand, and really forgot why he was there. And this predated the stroke by about, I think, at least 3 years. When we look back at it, is that a sign? When you're doing things and you're really not, you can't really focus on it, or you even forget about it. So those are some of the signs you can look at, and what happens is it's different for everybody, Wendy. So, for example, there's a patient of mine who was so high functioning for his level. He was 70 years old, but this guy was high school principal, dressed, to the T. He always could give you, great quotes, and then he's funny, and he always got jokes. But when he became normal, meaning his like his counterparts, like his colleagues, he had lost a step or two. So it's always you know, looking at ways in which you can find out what you were and where you are now. It's relative. And that's just, we're talking about, not just memory, but let's say if you're talking about movement disorders like Parkinson's, you may have had a patient named Jimmy who his only symptoms was a very slight tremor. And he was actually in his 30s. He had just had, he just had a child, and he had no thought about Parkinson's, but he saw a slight tremor that began, and in the beginning he just blew it off. But then when he saw a doctor, they said, have you been tested for Parkinson's? And lo and behold, he had it. So you can have very subtle signs. You have to be able to know that. You have to be able to look for those. But what I'd like to do is see, hey, can we address your gut health way before that happens? Because by the time you have symptoms, right, like you said, Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases, you said it really well, are reversible diseases. We used to think, hey, you're just getting old, and this is what it is. When you get old, it's the disease that you have. That's what we used to think. But now we know that Alzheimer's is basically a disease where you have inflammation that's out of control, inflammation that's not needed. And that inflammation creates havoc inside your brain, causes these things we call amyloid bodies that are not allowing these neurons to communicate. So when you think about what is a thought, right? We think our thoughts are our own and the most intimate part of our life. But when you think about a thought is just an impulse between two neurons based on the biochemistry and the neurochemicals that are there, that whether you have the right concentration of the neurotransmitter and whether they're firing, correctly or incorrectly, determines your thought. It's really sobering, because you could become somebody else. You could lose that part of you because you're just not paying attention. So the idea is that, can we then think about it before we have those problems, right? Some of those subtle signs that I talked about, it's not inevitable. To me, this is not an inevitable state, that you can live your best brain health and you can live your best life. And we know the relationships are there, and how can we stop it? I'll give you an example. So when people say, well, I'm not quite getting this, how can my gut be related to Parkinson's? Well, we now know there's a gut first hypothesis. So imagine when you look at the brain of a Parkinson's patient, Wendy, you have these things called Lewy bodies. These are just misshapen proteins that are all over the brain, and they're allowing the brain not to function well, and that gives the symptoms of Parkinson's, the tremors, the slow movement, the rigidity, and eventually they also, patients with Parkinson's, lose their cognition. But when you look at years before, in animal models, years before Parkinson's, you see the same Lewy bodies, these same misshapen proteins in the walls of the gut. So you've got those same misshapen proteins. And it's funny, what happens is that when you have one misshapen protein, it causes the next one to not be made correctly, and it goes on and on. And in mouse models, when you take off the vagus nerve, you decrease the transmission of these misshapen proteins into the brain. So this gut first hypothesis that is, with Parkinson's, lets you know, hey, you know what, we may have a chance to stop this horrific disease. My wife's grandmother, always the life of the party. She was amazing, and Parkinson's robbed her of her life. I mean, we know about Michael J. Fox, I mean, who he was and who he is today. Imagine if we could have thought about, 30 years before his diagnosis, just talk about his gut health, right? So this is just examples of what we can do to really change the equation, and exactly what you said, it's not inevitable.
Yeah. And so what are some of these changes that people need to make? There's a long list of diet and lifestyle things and supplements people can take. But what are your top picks, the lowest hanging fruit that people need to do to save their brain?
That's a great question, because you go everywhere. Everybody's got some advice for you, right? From your your gardener to your neighbor, etc. The way I think about it, I call it the 5-pillar method of changing your gut health. So the 5 pillars that I use is purpose. Number 2 is, we all think about this, is food and nutrition. Number 3 is movement, but specifically movement with purpose. 4 is community, or some people call it tribe. And last is spirituality. So I'll go through those with you. So purpose-driven living, that's to me the hardest one to have. And, now people, lots of my patients, especially young patients, are walking around aimlessly. People don't have a drive or don't always know, what their purpose is. Now, what does that have to do with gut health, right? What does it have to do with health in general? When you have a purpose-driven life, not less than a dozen studies will tell you that your risk of the most common diseases go down. And why is that? It's something that we talk about, and I'm sure you've talked about, as a fight or flight mechanism. When you have purpose-driven living, you have less unrest, right? When you have less anxiety about, hey, what am I doing next? And when you have that, when we were hunters and gatherers, right? When we were, chasing animals and just raising crops, we had a very specific purpose. That's just to survive. Like, we wanted to eat food, make sure our family and we are living. But that's gone now because a lot of our basic needs are met. Then it comes, what do we do, right? What was going to give us purpose and joy? When you have that purposeful living, you're taking away that fight or flight response. You're decreasing your cortisol. You're decreasing your inflammation. And so not only does it help your gut, clearly it helps your gut, because when you reduce inflammation, your microbiome thrives, your gut wall integrity is improved, and your gut is essentially in the best state it can be just by doing one thing, which is to have a purpose-driven life. So when I talk to my patients and people who, come to me advice, is to talk to them about really finding a way to be able to deliver purpose. And I talk about in my book, Heal Your Gut, Save Your Brain. So purpose is the first line. Before you do anything, there's got to be a why, right? Why are you doing this? It can't just be because, you want to look good, with a tank top or in the bikini or whatever it is. Those are superficial goals, because eventually they'll, they fade away. So you've got to be able to find out why you're doing what you're doing. Is it, for me, everything I really do is to be able to help folks to be able to have better lives. And also for myself, I want to be around for my kids and their grandkids to be in the best health, not just physically, but mentally. That drives me and my wife. We jump out of bed. We don't just crawl out of bed and like, oh my God, another Monday or whatever. Every day is a joy. So purpose-driven living. Number 2 is food and nutrition, not a diet, because any diet you use, right, is just another word for failure. Simply put, if you want to do something very simple, just pick whole foods, right? Whole foods, less processed fats, less processed carbohydrates. Try to have fermented foods, which are foods like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, tepashi, whatever if you look up fermented foods, every culture has them. Then there are tons of them that if you can incorporate that into every meal, those are the probiotics that you give into your gut. A little bit of terminology, right? So prebiotics are the food that your gut bugs, which are the probiotics, get, and helps them grow and feed. If you've got 1 trillion plus bugs in your intestinal system and you give them a few billion, that's a factor of at least 1,000, right? So you need the food in order to be able to build that up. So prebiotics give you the food. Probiotics are the actual bacteria, and postbiotics are the products like I talked to you about that the bugs make, right? So neurotransmitters, short-chain fatty acids, those are the postbiotics. So when you give fermented foods, you're giving direct probiotics. And a lot of these fermented foods also have prebiotics within them to be able to give the food for the bugs. So if you have a great diet plan, you can actually not destroy your gut like you talked about. If you have a pepperoni pizza once in a while, it's okay. But if you have it every day, that is a nuclear bomb for your gut. It doesn't know what to do with the processed carbs, doesn't know what to do with the preservatives, doesn't know what to do with the bad fats. And here's what happens, right? The gut then reacts to these foreign substances as if it's some enemy, like it's a bug, and creates this inflammation. That inflammation then results in all the things we talked about. So having a diet plan is crucial.
I want to give thanks to one of our sponsors. It's gluteryl transdermal glutathione spray. So glutathione is essential for detoxification and to promote energy, cleansing, and overall well-being. So enter gluteryl. It's the groundbreaking topical glutathione spray that's about to become your new wellness essential. So Gluterol delivers glutathione on demand through a multi-patented sub-nano technology, challenging the IV and the liposomal delivery systems currently on the market. So glutathione is key to balancing oxidative stress and free radicals and promoting longevity. So add Gluterol to your longevity routine this year by visiting arowellness.com. That's AURO wellness.com, and use code Wendy5 to get 5% off your first order. Can you talk about seed oils? Because I think the industrial seed oils are so insidious and inflammatory and in all the foods and such a huge contributing factor to gut and brain health issues.
Yeah, we typically just use olive oil for our cooking because we believe in that. There's some controversy in the seed oil because people feel like that there's not enough evidence. I think there's enough smoke that there's some fire. I try to, if I can, right, to most people that have seen good results with oils, I use olive oil, and I think I sometimes use avocado oil as well. But I agree with you, using the seed oils is can be detrimental to your gut, and there's been multiple studies that show it. So if you can avoid them, please do. There are people in the world and people who are watching may not be able to afford anything else. If you cannot, then I get it. Use it sparingly, but if you can't, avoid them, because that also, it wreaks havoc in your gut and your gut health. And so when you do that, especially if you do it on a regular basis, this is what the whole key to this is, that I really follow the 80-20 rule, at least the 90-10 rule, meaning that most of the time, right, 80 to 90% of the time, you do everything you can to be able to follow these principles. But, listen, I have kids. I have to go to a birthday party. I don't give them like a menu before I come. Like, I don't want this, I don't want that. So you kind of live. But if you do most of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, the things that we're talking about, you'll be more than okay. I think you'll be better off than 90% of people out there. There's so many places that you don't even know if they're using seed oils, if they're using preservatives. They're not going to tell you. We don't eat out hardly at all. The only time we eat out is when we have to, like if we're traveling. But one of the things I talk about in my book is that if you eat out, then what you're doing is you're basically exposing yourself to these toxins that you have no control over. The folks that are out there, they're trying to make money, which is nothing wrong with that, but you have to know and accept that risk. So your point's really well taken. I think we have to be able to know. One of the things we have to do when we have a diet plan is do something unbelievable. Go into the kitchen and not just have a cup of coffee to talk to someone, but actually cook. And especially if you cook with your family. And that's, you can, one of the pillars that I talk about is community, right? If you are cooking and eating with your family, it's incredible the amount of benefits you get. And it's not just the nutritional content, it's all of the bonding and the benefits of community that you get when you're cooking with your family. And they also learn, like my kids know how to read labels. They know, what foods to eat, what not to eat. They also go to birthday parties, also go to people's houses, and then they don't say, well, I can't eat this or I can't eat that. But they know, and they have control, which is 90% of the time, they pick the right thing. So my fourth pillar I'll go to is community, right? If anybody's heard about the Rosetta effect, or if you haven't, look it up. Rosetta, Pennsylvania, a group of Italian immigrants. They were in the 1950s. And I think it was a doctor who went and visited that community, and they saw that these folks were not getting any or very few heart attacks. And they're people that are thriving in their 80s and sometimes even 90s. In the 1950s, when half the country was dying of heart attacks and life expectancy wasn't great. And what they found out was the biggest factor, almost exclusive factor, that helped these folks to have longevity and freedom from some of the biggest diseases was community. So these were Italian immigrants. When they walked home from work, they talked to their neighbors. They ate with their families. They did things together. There are people that ask you, how's your day? And they want you to just say, fine. They don't want you to even go on and find, tell you about their day. But this community that we're talking about actually wanted to find out about your day. They were actually joyous. And that, again, created this environment of protection that protected these folks from so many diseases. And I believe it's because of inflammation. And again, it's same concept as purpose-driven living, right? When you have a community that supports you, not yes people that just say everything you do is great, but people who support you and you feel like you're part of a community. Human beings thrive when we're in a community, right? That same unrest is decreased. Your fight or flight mechanism, that unopposed cortisol goes down and you have decreased inflammation. And there are multiple studies to show community-based populations have increased longevity and decreased diseases. And it goes back to your gut, again, to decrease inflammation. The last pillar I'll talk about is spirituality. And spirituality doesn't mean that you have to go and pray every day. If you want to, you can. But spirituality to me just means that you understand your place in the universe, right? You understand what's happening. So it means a walk in the garden. Does it mean yoga? It could mean tai chi. It could mean any form of spirituality. And again, that has been shown to improve your gut microbiome. It's shown to be able to improve not only gut health, but your overall health. And again, it's the same principle of what you're doing is trying to decrease unrest in your body. Besides the toxins that you know that you can identify, one of the biggest toxins we have is unopposed stress and unrest in our lives, right? I mean, from our kids and their phones, blasting them with all kinds of stuff from the adults, and in every kind of stress where your boss, your spouse, your entire life is filled with so much stress. You need a way to be able to oppose that. When you don't oppose that, your body doesn't know that your boss yelled at you or somebody screamed at you when you're driving. It thinks you're still chasing an animal, right? So when we were hunters and gatherers, we had one job is to eat lunch and not be lunch. So we had that great mechanism that was in place, and we still have that within us. When we have this unopposed stress, this unopposed unrest, this fight or flight is activated. When you follow these principles, right, these 5 pillars, you can really change that. And then it affects your gut, it affects your brain, and it affects the rest of your body. So that's the approach I give to folks. I say, oh, listen, you don't have to do all of it all the time. Because think about it, many of my patients are and not even 30 or 40, they're 50s, 60s, 70s. They've spent their entire lives living one way. And to me, it's just take one small step of each of these pillars and just do it every day for a week, and you see if there's a difference. And over time, they notice dramatic differences, not only in their gut health, right? Obviously, I'm a gastroenterologist, so a lot of my patients are biased. They're coming to me because they're bloated, uncomfortable, having digestive problems. But what they don't know, and until I ask them, is, hey, do you ever feel like you have, the symptoms of brain fog, or are you having joint pains? There's so many connections between what they come to see me for and other more subtle signs. So, that's how I approach giving them the keys to be able to help their gut health and then subsequently their overall health.
Say someone has a lot of these symptoms that you mentioned, and they go to their doctor, they go to their gastroenterologist. Is there some sort of testing that people should do, or to test their gut microbiome to see what gut bugs they need, et cetera? Is like the average gastroenterologist going to be advising them like this or doing testing like this?
That's a good question. So most will not, right? So
Yeah.
most will just say, hey, you've got this and this is what I can do for you. And I'm sorry, I can't help you. So I think you have to be able to, and this is why we can look at our book and we talk about ways in which you can test. So there's some systems, right? So the one I've looked at the most is called Biome. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You can look at, specifically, let's say we talk about this is bad and this is good microbiome, but those are generalities, right? We can get more specific. So for example, you may be missing Prevotella. You may be missing, certain species of a bug. So for you, eating Brussels sprouts may not be the key, right? May not be what you need. But maybe you need to eat less of those. And the one key when I talk about nutrition is that you have to pick a variety of foods, right? Not just one vegetable or not just one pasture raised meat that you have. So you want to be able to have a variety. So when you get tested with your microbiome, and the other thing is that it can vary. You should not just get tested once. I would at least do it twice a year, so you can see if there have been changes that have changed in your microbiome that you've made a dent in. Because if you don't do that, it's not always a static thing, meaning that it may have changed by the time you last tested it. And so when you do that, you also can get recommendations on certain foods you can have and certain practices, certain supplements you can take. So I think that you have to custom make it. We're giving really, really general advice, which is good, but you can get one step further and really talk about, hey, can we actually see what we need? And even more than that, you can get, for example, should we take, one of the short chain fatty acids that these bugs make is butyrate. Should we just directly take butyrate? Because at the end of the day, right, when we're looking at the microbiome and we're looking at, what it's doing, we are interested in what it's making and how it's affecting our environment. So we're getting better and better at actually going to the postbiotic that it's made. And it's not that perfect, because even though we may make butyrate and it looks chemically the same, but it's not in the same environment or the same form that the microbiome is making. So I still think it's worthwhile to feed the microbiome and know, what deficiencies they have. And I also think that, taking it one step at a time and not overwhelming yourself with too much information is really important, because otherwise you get lost, right? So many of the folks that I'm sure are asking you for advice and coming to me, they get lost in the details and they forget the big concepts that you can follow every day that can make significant differences in their lives. I think if you make small changes that are achievable, right, that leads to significant changes throughout your life. One of my favorite athletes, his name is Tom Brady, and he said, Tom Brady says, I don't feel like I'm better than anybody else, but I make these consistent changes every single day. And that leads to huge changes in the rest of my body. And that's, I think, the philosophy that we take. Listen, we've got evidence, for example, with strokes. We have experiments in animals that show that if a mouse, you take a young mouse and they have a stroke, but you give them an old microbiome, right? A microbiome of an older person, then what happens is that their post-stroke outcomes are the same as the older mouse. And then if you take the older mouse, right, and they have a stroke, and you take the microbiome of a young mouse, quote unquote, their stroke outcomes are much, much better, very similar to the young mice. So it just tells you that, if you make these changes in your life, right, if you make these changes and like you're talking about, making more specifically, you can actually change the outcomes of even a disease like stroke. If I knew that, when my dad was still alive, my dad passed away sadly in 2017. But if I knew those factors, because at that time we didn't have this kind of knowledge we do now, we could make some specific changes that may have changed the outcome for him. And we're talking about, will fecal microbiota transplantation change the outcome of somebody with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or stroke, or multiple sclerosis? These are things that are just on the horizon. But if we go further back, a decade back, or even 2 decades back, and start some of these principles, we can really make a dent in these diseases.
I want to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, Pneuma Nitric Oxide Serum. So picture this: from our 20s, our bodies begin to lose nitric oxide, that vital anti-aging molecule. So energy drops, skin wrinkles, and vitality fades. It's just nature's path. But it doesn't have to be yours. At Pneuma Nitric Oxide, they've embarked on a journey to defy nature, and their mission goes beyond skincare. It's about embracing a lifestyle where health and beauty radiate from within. Their groundbreaking nitric oxide activating serum is just the beginning, but they have a unique dual chamber delivery system, and it rejuvenates the skin, giving you back what time has taken away. You can learn more about Pneuma Nitric Oxide Serum at n101.com. Yeah, and a lot of what you're saying is very simple, taking away some problematic foods in your environment, reducing stress, in a lot of different ways and adding in some of the probiotic foods, maybe foods with oligosaccharides or sugars our guts need to eat, like from beans and things like that. And also very importantly is not thinking your gut issue, there's just a physical solution like diet and whatnot. There's also the spiritual and community component that very much contributes to our physical health as well.
100%. And I think that it has to all come together, right? You can't just talk about, hey, and nothing is in isolation here. And your whole body is connected. I'm talking specifically about the brain in my book, but this will have effects all throughout your body. And you have to be, I think you have to be holistic in the way you think. If you don't, then you're missing key parts of it. And I think that's what I think is really important. And in the book we give support in science. To me, it's very important that we don't just say, well, I had a couple of patients and this what happened, or we talked to somebody. It's really looking at the science and looking at research and saying, is this supported? In this field, of gut brain, there are very few of these, placebo-controlled studies that drug manufacturers make, for example, because, we're still at this is the cutting edge. So we know, and even 10 years ago, we didn't have some of this information that we do now. So it's important to also support some of this, to me, with science. And we talk about that in our book quite a bit, and talk about how you can really change the environment, for diseases like stroke and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, but also for people who don't have it. Much of the people listening today don't have those diseases, but what can you do to really optimize your brain function? We talk about, the executives, some of them I know, they take ice baths in the morning or do all these hacks to be able to get the best performance. Well, all you have to really do is some of these simple things. And it's simple when you talk about it, but it's very complex when you try to do it, right? All of us have been there when, there's everywhere you go, there's all these temptations and foods and activities that really wreak havoc in your body. Something as simple as getting on a social media app before you go to bed can wreak havoc on your sleeping habits. When you don't sleep well, your entire body is in disarray, including your gut, because that's the time to repair it. So it's really looking at all of these factors holistically to say, what can I do? And it goes back to having a purpose-driven life. When you have purpose, right, you don't have to be convinced to do something. Like my kids, they have these little iPads and they never, Wendy, forget to charge them, because they know if it's not charged, you ain't going to be able to use them. So it's a simple example that when we know what we want, right? And if we want to be able to do something that we find as pleasurable, we find as important, we then just, it's autopilot. You don't have to sit there and convince somebody to be able to do it. So that's the key about being holistic and not just saying, I'm just going to do this. Most people think about diet and they think about changing your gut, but it's way more than that. And the gut's a muscular organ. If you don't move, if you sit in your butt all day long and wait for DoorDash to deliver the food, your gut will not be healthy. If you don't move, you won't have the milieu, the homeostasis of energy to be able to provide the right environment for your gut microbiome and the correct hormone production that's there. Your immune system will be in disarray. That's why we have disease. I have at least 10 patients today that have messages to me about Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. It's an epidemic. So the things that we're doing every day is wreaking havoc, but it's not inevitable, and we can make simple changes. To me, it has to be simple, because if it's complex and it's formula and you have to either do 10 things and 15 things a day, it just becomes untenable and people can't do it. And that's why I'd like to keep it as simple as possible, so people all over the world can really be able to reach the goals that they want to.
And what do you want your readers to really take away from your book, The Heal the Gut, Save Your Brain?
That brain health and the deterioration of brain health is not inevitable, right? You have the power in your hands to be able to change your future. That to be a health hero, you just make these small changes every day to be able to achieve the health that you deserve. And I think that when we do that, we can really, really make a dent in this. It's not a mountain that you're climbing, right? It seems like it's, oh my gosh, I have to do all these things, I don't want to do it. It's really taking small steps every day, actionable steps consistently that can lead to amazing changes that are proven by research and science.
Yeah, and I had a friend of mine that he's passed now, but he worked as an attorney until his late 80s. He played tennis, which is, so good for your brain as well, that hand-eye coordination. And he ate an amazing diet, mainly like a paleo type diet. And he was sharp as a tack and very active and healthy until late into his 80s. And I just thought, that is what I'm aiming for. That is what I want. But he was very disciplined, very, very, very disciplined in every facet of his life, with the exercise, the diet, and being purpose-driven, working late into his 80s, where a lot of people, aren't so purpose-driven and just kind of can't wait to stop working. But when you're doing something you love, for me, like I can't imagine not working, because I really enjoy what I do. But for him, it was just very awe-inspiring. And but you can live a life like that. You can make those consistent choices.
Yeah, and the key is that he probably enjoyed himself. The thing that I see a lot of people do, they go to the gym, but they hate it. They do something, but they hate it. And when you do that, you actually are counteracting any benefit that you're giving yourself, because you're constantly in a state of unrest. And, and by this, I mean bad relationships, right? And then bad jobs, all of it. And you have to really examine yourself and make some tough choices. At least, most of us that are watching this can make those choices. There's certain parts of the world that people watch this, they don't have those choices. I understand that. So you have to do what you have to do. But for most of us, we have those choices. If you're in a bad relationship, then, make the tough choice and look for changes if you need to, right? Or at least get some therapy. If you're in a bad job, there's other jobs out there. Life is not all about, just continuing to live somebody else's dream or continuing to, look at social norms. It's really about looking at yourself. And when you take care of yourself, right, you're actually taking care of your family and your kids as well, because you want to be the best self, best, version of you to be able to thrive. And many of my patients are living to their 80s and 90s, but they're in a nursing home. They're getting a Foley catheter to be able to get their urine, and they're getting feeding tubes. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ways to be able to thrive, and you can do that just like your friend you talked about. And you have to, and the other part of it is you have to really understand, is that what I want? And if you do that, and you coupled with some of the techniques we talk about in our books, you have a great chance. And there are thousands and thousands of people in communities that do this every day, and they thrive. And we just have to be able to take a step back and say, it's maybe not the big house, the big car, the big whatever that's going to drive you. Because at the end of the day, that only gets you so far. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. You just have to examine yourself and say, what is it that I really want, and how can I achieve it? If you do that, then you can break it down. And we break it down in this book. We give recipes about, hey, listen, if you don't know what whole foods mean and how to be able to eat for your gut and brain health, we'll show you how to do that. If you don't know how to live purpose-driven lives, we'll show you how to do that. There are ways people have done this, and they've done it successfully.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Dr. Nandi, thank you so much for coming on the Myers Detox podcast. And, I love giving people resources like this, say when they go to their doctor and they can't really get the answers, the underlying root causes of what ails them, having resources like you from a medical doctor who's doing this every day and giving you all of those pieces that you need to really address the larger underlying root causes of your health issues. So thanks so much for your contribution. And everyone, I'm Dr. Wendy Myers. Thanks for tuning in to the Myers Detox podcast, where we have experts from around the world talking about detoxification, anti-aging, bioenergetics, and so many of the kind of advanced health topics that we talk about on this show. So thanks for tuning in.
The Myers Detox podcast is created and hosted by Wendy Myers. This podcast is for information purposes only. Statements and views expressed on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Wendy Myers and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.